Welcome back to Talk of the Town. Quite a busy show here for you today. And right now we're going to go to the phones and say hello to my next guest. This is State Representative Rob Sampson. How are you this morning, sir?
I'm doing great, Steve. Glad to join you.
Appreciate your time, sir. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here, obviously. Let's start with what's going on in Hartford.
You know, I was listening just before I called in to you and Tom's conversation, and you guys nailed pretty much the major issues that are happening around the state. People are talking about tolls and marijuana, gun control. The one thing that they're not talking about, however, is how to fix our state's fiscal problems, and that is because I think the majority party wants to talk about anything at all besides that, because they know they're in a tough spot. It's an election year. They're responsible for the damage done to our state over the last several decades. They've done nothing in the last several years to try and address it. Even though the problems are staring us right in the face, and people know what needs to be done. So they want to talk about anything else. So it's the year of the wedge issue.
Well, yeah, that's, I'm glad you brought this up because I haven't had a chance to address it, but I've kind of gotten this impression that we really are just, they're scrambling for distractions. And as Tom mentioned, and I don't know if you heard him talk about this, but Mayor O'Leary spoke yesterday at the Waterbury Regional Chamber luncheon, and he nailed it. He said that this state is in a huge financial crisis, and nobody seems to want to take that seriously.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say nobody, but I would say few people. And I'm one of the few members of the legislature that voted against the state budget that ultimately passed last year, and I think that was a big mistake. Republicans put together a budget that had no tax hikes, fully funded the towns, and we managed to get that through both chambers, the House and Senate, with a few Democrats crossing over, and we had them. We had them on the ropes. That's the budget we should be living under right now, and if we stuck to our guns, I think we would be, because I think the pressure would have mounted on Democrat legislators across the state to have to join us to override the governor's veto. But instead, the governor vetoed the bill, sent us back to the drawing board, and I think, and I understand the reasons why they did it, but the leaders of the House and Republican Senate chose to get back in the room with them and negotiate another budget, which, while it was better than what the Democrats would have done on their own, it's only marginally better. And it takes us, down the same path of more taxes, more debt, and look at we're only a few months into that budget, and we already have deficit problems.
Well, yeah, that was going to mention that while you all came to an agreement and got a budget signed, it doesn't seem to have been a very successful budget, considering the fact that it only took a mere couple of weeks before we were right back into deficits.
We knew at the time we were standing in the House chamber debating the bill that the second it was signed, it was going to create a deficit. I could not, in good conscience, support an action like that, and I won't going forward.
So. One of the things that also was mentioned at this legislative breakfast over in Naugatuck by Senator Berthel is that there are just thousands, or about 1,000 or so, other items being brought up during this short session, as opposed to items that are addressing the elephant in the room.
Right.
Are you seeing this?
Yes, of course. I wouldn't say that this year is patently different than any other year, but the second year of your legislative term, because state reps and state senators all serve 2-year terms, the second year of the biennium is supposed to be devoted to budget-related matters. In fact, individual legislators are prohibited from introducing any proposed bills unless they are related to a budget. The thing is that there's a way around that, and the way around it is to write a letter to whatever committee might have cognizance over such an issue, and you can write a letter asking them to raise the bill on your behalf, and then once that's done, you can co-sponsor it. So it doesn't really stop the flood of legislation. And I'm guilty of it, too. I mean, I put in probably as many bills as anyone else, and that's in part because the other side's doing it. And I figure if we're going to talk about their issues, I want to at least distract from their agenda by being able to talk about positive change at the same time. But you're right. We should be focusing on fixing the state's problems, and that is not happening. That needs to happen from a position of leadership, and I don't think we have that anymore. I think we have a lame dunk governor. His concern on the way out the door is securing, the votes for Democrat legislators going forward. He managed to make sure he took care of entitlements and state employees, and I think that was his big concern. And he's going to move on and do whatever he's going to do, and hopefully the next thing that happens is we get a Republican governor and we can start going in a different direction.
So while you're dealing with all of these distractions and you're trying to kind of sift through the chaff to get to the actual meat of this supposed legislative session, are you seeing any progress? Are you seeing any steps toward actual structural reform that would stop this bleeding that we seem to be going through?
Sadly, I don't. Steve, I wish I could give you something more promising.
Well, that's a whole lot for me to chew on there.
The only bright light that I see between you and me is that I think there is a real chance for Republicans to pick up majorities in either the House or both the House and Senate, and that all of the candidates running for governor on the Republican side, and I know we have lots of them, all of them sound good to me. Every one of them is talking about the right things. Every one of them is talking about the need for major structural change in the way the state handles its finances. The only concern I have about that is that it's campaign mode, obviously, and the concern is whoever we do elect, I hope they put their money where their mouth is and actually follow through on the things that they are claiming that they want to do.
Well, I hear it on the call with the callers all the time. We get a lot of frustration with people who are constantly, looking at what's going on up in Hartford, and then they look at what's happening around them in the state. They see all of this basically chaos going on, and then they read stories about things like, well, we just bonded more money for a soccer stadium. We bonded more money for this. And it doesn't seem to strike me or a lot of people that call the show here as though there's any sense of either urgency or seriousness when it comes to actually fixing this problem.
Well, I explain to people all the time when they come to me and they say, it doesn't make sense. What you guys are doing up there, it doesn't make sense. Can't you see that you can't spend more than you have? That's how real people who are handling their households and their businesses and their daily lives think and operate as problem solvers. People who get elected to public office, many of them have different motivations entirely. Their goal is not to fix the state. Their goal is to get reelected. So when they are introducing and passing legislation and voting on things, they are doing it from a perspective of what is going to sell in my district. And sadly, we have a lot of districts in this state that are filled with people that receive benefits from the state of Connecticut at the expense of other people. And as long as that happens, those legislators will continue to be in a majority, continue to get elected, and the hardworking, tax-paying citizens of our state are going to be continued to be burdened with an ever-expanding government. And there is no end to that unless we change leadership.
Speaking with State Representative Rob Sampson, now you've also, on a different topic, you've announced that you are looking to potentially replace Senator Mark Lee for the 16th Senate District, correct?
Yeah, that is correct, Steve. So Senator Mark Lee is my very, very dear friend. He and I are very close friends, and we got elected together in 2011, and he and I are well known as the two most conservative legislators in Hartford, me in the House and him in the Senate. Joe came to me last year and said that he was considering running for lieutenant governor. And he said the only way he could do that is if he knew that he was going to leave his Senate seat in good hands, and asked me to run to replace him. And I accepted, and I'm doing very well. I'm just about done with my fundraising, and I feel like I got a good campaign ahead of me.
Well, then I'm going to ask you this question. How is it going with the SEC?
The SEC. Oh, that's a good question. How much time do we have, Steve?
Well, I mean, if anybody doesn't know what we're talking about, Representative Sampson and Senator Mark Lee have both been fighting the State Elections Committee on what they consider to be an unfair ruling on something that they had included on their political mailers, basically saying that they disagreed with Governor Malloy's policies. And the State Election Committee has decided, since they included Governor Malloy's name on this mailing, they violated the state election regulations.
That's very well described. My argument would be that the State Election Enforcement Commission does not have the right to infringe on the free speech of political candidates who are campaigning for election just because they happen to side with the governor or anyone else. I mean, their argument is that somehow my campaign mailings that indicated that I was in opposition to Governor Malloy's policies, his tax hikes, for instance, the early release program, which you referenced a little bit before I got on. I'm opposed to those things, and I wanted to make sure that I was informing the voters in my district that I was absolutely opposed to those policies, and if elected, I would go to Hartford and fight against them. To me, I think that's a perfectly legitimate use of campaign mail and advertising. But they don't see it that way. They think that those campaign mailings were to the benefit of other candidates. And we've kind of put them on their heels a few times because initially they tried to say that we were benefiting a specific Republican candidate. But we've put them back to point out that there are other candidates that were involved in the race, other Democrat candidates, in fact, and other independent candidates, write-in candidates. And if they want to make our ability to have free speech contingent upon other candidates contributing to the cost of our mailings, they're essentially limiting our ability to tell our constituents what we think. Further, I would just say that, you know, the idea that my position relative to the governor's policy agenda as a state legislative candidate who's a check on the executive branch, to say that's not relevant to the voters, to me is absurd on its face. And I feel like ultimately we're going to go to an actual courtroom, Steve. And when that happens, I am extremely confident we'll be victorious.
Well, and just to clarify, there was a situation with Governor Malloy sending out mailers when he was running for re-election that basically called for people to vote in a certain way, correct? And,
That's correct,
and
yeah.
the state Democrats kind of got in trouble for that and had to pay a fine for it. And that was a pretty blatant, clear example of a violation of the regs that the state has set up if you're going to accept public financing. Nowhere in your mailings did you say don't vote for this person or vote for that person other than yourself, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, no, and in fact, you know, it's very interesting that you say that because for me to say that I was opposed to Governor Malloy's tax hike, to me is not an attack piece at all because just by the fact that Governor Malloy was reelected, some people had to be in favor of that tax hike. So I think it depends on how you're reading it. You know, it was a statement of fact that my position was, you know, in an effort to inform the voters in my district, I'm opposed to the governor.
Well, and what I found interesting about it is the governor has a bully pulpit. The governor can give a speech anytime he wants and lay out his positions, whether he's in, you know, proposing something or talking or speaking in opposition of another proposal. And the media covers it, you know, no charge to the governor. And he can do this every day if he wants. So everyone can easily find out what the positions are of the governor. And for you to just simply say, I disagree with the positions of the governor, is somehow violating, you know, free speech regs or speech or election law really is a mind-boggling position for the SEEC to take.
It's a stretch, and I think that they know that. So they have kind of backed off their original position, which is you can't do this, to, well, you could have done it if you did it in this way. And you got these people to contribute, which would be an impossibility. You know, I don't know who I would have had to reach out to determine whether they were benefiting or not from my campaign mailer, and how much to charge them, and what would I do if they refused to contribute. You know, my free speech as a political candidate, and I believe the First Amendment is there to protect free speech more than anything else, cannot be, restricted by the actions of another party. And that's going to be our position in court. And as I said, I think that there's very little doubt that we're going to be victorious ultimately.
Well, I give you a lot of credit for standing up for this. I know it would have been just as easy to just say, you know what, here, we'll just get this behind us and move on, which, you know, we've seen, you know, and not to denigrate anybody for doing this. It's certainly the easy position to take. You know, you're facing some political risk in continuing this fight.
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm quite certain if I have an opponent in my race for Senate, they are going to claim that, I'm under, I've had a complaint filed against me with the state elections enforcement folks and things like that. The thing is, I'm so confident in our ability to defend our position on the issue, and I think that when people hear exactly what this is about, I think it even emboldens our position even further. As you mentioned, this was part of a organized political effort, essentially, to protect Democrat legislative candidates from being associated with the governor's policies. That's why this all happened. And 30 some odd people had complaints filed against them for similar type of mailings. What's interesting is that only the other legislative candidates filed those complaints, Steve, not the governor, who is the one who is allegedly being hurt by these mailings. I know if my opponent was using his money to send mail attacking another person, I would not care.
So they make the rules so that they can exploit the rules. That's not cynical in the least.
Yeah, and this is the result of an advisory opinion that came out only 2 weeks before the election. My mail had already been written, printed, mailed, and in people's hands and probably their wastebaskets before this ever happened. There was nothing I could do to stop it, and they knew that.
So you and Senator Mark Lee are continuing to fight this battle. What has this had any impact on your opinion regarding the public financing of campaigns?
I have never been in favor of the public financing of campaigns, and for exactly this reason. I'm a limited government, Constitution-loving Republican, and I think anytime you put the government in a position of authority to make arbitrary decisions, especially a state agency that has political appointments, I think that you are playing with fire. And I would much rather have an open and free ability for people to raise money, spend it as they wish, and compete in a free market kind of arrangement for campaigns. When the state actually can say what you can spend your money on and what you can say, I think we are limiting our freedom as Americans.
Well, I'm just always a little put off by the over-regulation on everything. I mean, a lot of people, I'm not going to say, that these people who put these regulations are in place who are continuing to push this are doing this for political purposes, because I can't read another person's mind. But it does kind of smack a little bit of, and I hate to use the word totalitarianism, but, we give so
Big
much
brother for sure.
Yeah, we give so much power to a small unelected group of people that they can make whatever decisions they want, and there's really nothing that you or I can do about it. And then now they're attempting to control the message that you were trying to put out there. And I'm really surprised how the other side, it was so blatant that it was a violation, and there was still this kind of battle going, no. And then they turn around and look at what you put out there and they go, well, this is obvious what he was saying.
Yeah. Well, the issue in that the case with the governor was really about federal election laws versus state election laws. And in my case, it has absolutely nothing to do with public financing, by the way. The issue is regarding the statute that exists regardless of how the money is obtained and spent. And it's a laudable statute. The statute says essentially that if I have campaign funds that I've earned from people donating to my campaign, they must be used to further my own campaign. That's what the law actually says. And that means, you can't use the money to go to a trip in Aruba or something.
Yeah, or promote another candidate in another district.
Or promote another candidate. And I completely get that. If I had received money from my donors and then use that money to go ahead and spend it on Tom Foley's campaign to beat Governor Malloy, that would be wrong. But it's a stretch to say that me explaining to voters my position relative to the governor. The governor proposes a budget to the legislature. So, and it's Governor Malloy's budget, just like it's Haley's Comet, What am I supposed to call it,
Yeah. Well, you're supposed to say, I'm opposed to this, I'm opposed to that, I'm opposed to this other thing, but you're not supposed to say who the person is that proposed those proposals.
That's right.
It's like,
only
what?
got so much space on a mailer,
Yeah.
and the voters understood it was Governor Malloy's budget. So that's the question. You show up in the door someplace and they say, how do you feel about Governor Malloy's budget? And that's the answer to the question, and that's why it shows up on my mail that way. It was not an attempt to, as you said, nowhere does it say vote for or against Governor Malloy or anyone else.
I find this an interesting case only because it sounds to me like a complete waste of time. So I'm glad you're standing up and fighting back on this, and I wish you success on this fight. But stay in touch. We'll get you back on, and I appreciate your time today, sir.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Steve. Happy to come back anytime and talk to you about tolls, marijuana, you name it, anything you want.
Yep, once we get close to actually having some actual details to discuss here as opposed to, like I said, sifting through the chaff, we'll get you back.
Of course. Have a great day.
Take care, sir. That was State Representative Rob Sampson.